Crash Bandicoot is a franchise that I hold really close to my heart. While to some it may be just a silly little platformer, this, without a doubt, is my favorite video game series of all time. I understand that seems pretty crazy coming from a 24-year-old guy who has access to beautiful 4K ray tracing games with tons of rich story, but it's too late now. There's not really anything I can do about it. Take a dive into my own personal history. Crash Bandicoot 1 is the first game I've ever played. Its original take on 3D platforming blew my mind as a kid, and when I return to it today, I'm still impressed. It's hard not to love Crash after that first stroll through Insanity Island. It's definitely one of the things I wish I could do for the first time again. For a long time, I was worried it was the nostalgia talking. A lot of my childhood consisted of me playing Crash. There was even a time when kid me wanted to be him. My parents used to get really mad at me for doing the Crash dance out in public. However, every time I come back to this game, I'm shocked. Crash 1 may be a rougher title in the series, but it's no less iconic. The foundation that this game was able to lay down for the games later down the line is something that needs to be talked about. That's where this video comes in. This is the start of a series of me looking back at the entirety of my favorite video game franchise. Or at least the mainline ones. Well, we'll see. We'll discuss his gameplay, innovations, and so much more, all in an effort to prove that I am not crazy for constantly playing a game about an orange rat with jorts. Be warned, while I'm going to heavily praise this game, I do have gripes with it, and I can be critical, so be ready for that part of the video. Take a seat on your "What have I got?" for a Crash Bandicoot retrospective.
Hey, plumber boy, mustache man, your worst nightmare has arrived.
Pack up your stuff. I got a little surprise for you here.
Check it out. What do you think about that? We got real-time, 3D, lush organic environments. How's that make you feel, buddy?
Feel a little like your days are numbered?
I'm gonna have to ask you to leave.
You're hurting my elbow.
Is that Italian?
No, Bandicoot is an Australian name.
Crash kept things simple. Crash Bandicoot wasn't trying to do anything completely revolutionary. No, the true goal of Crash Bandicoot was to take a Reach the Goal style of game, something like what you see from a Sonic title or a Donkey Kong Country, and flip it to play in 3D. So now the player character can run into the screen. You get to explore levels from a completely new perspective. This simple shift in perspective is one of the reasons I've always preferred Crash when it comes to 90s platformers. You're able to see in front of you, but you still get that simple, clear-to-course objective. When I was a kid, this was perfect for me. For whatever reason, I couldn't handle having a big open space to play in. Maybe I was just a dumb kid, but big open spaces always made me lose interest. Having Crash be a linear game but still being in 3D lets the gameplay feel familiar and new at the same time. It was a really good use of early 3D in a video game, and throwing in some 2D sections to keep players from feeling overwhelmed was a great addition. While this game did still have its fair share of 2D sections, I think the effect of the 3D parts still show in them. Levels are incredibly detailed. With Crash doing hallway structured levels, the developers made sure to dress up the environments. They did some really nice work on the scenery. My favorite has always been jungle levels. The use of grass, trees, and mushrooms gives the areas this very detailed and lush feeling. It always makes you feel like you're deep inside of a jungle, going against the wildlife, traversing over chasms and booby traps. I think it's this type of detail that makes levels in Crash stand out to me so well. That and the way they all fit into the context of the game, which is no doubt something that gets taken for granted in Crash 1. This game takes place on 3 tropical islands, so level variety had to be just interesting enough but still makes sense to be on one of these islands. They absolutely nailed some of the level concepts. Let's take a look at a couple. Jungle Rollers is a vibrant, deep jungle setting with obstacles that look to be man-made. Someone could have lived here long ago. It's kind of telling by the rolling booby traps everywhere. This level is a good example. We have a very nice and believable setting for an island that makes for a fun environment. Upstream has you working your way up we'll take a wild guess. You jump from debris in the water across moving leaves, lily pads, and over Venus flytraps, all while avoiding fish snapping at you. The whole level has you one wrong jump away from drowning Crash. I really like Upstream. I think it's a real standout early in the game. The water looks believable too, with the current constantly moving against you. The soundtrack lets you hear all that water flowing. It's very nice. Temple Ruins is a forgotten dungeon on Island 2. It kinda has a spooky feel to it. There's a dark backdrop with only light sources being flames set probably decades ago. You traverse over very tight moving platforms and avoid spiders and bats. This level used to genuinely creep me out. The music didn't help either. It starts out eerie and then it just crescendos out of nowhere. The Lost City by far is my favorite level in the game. I think this setting screams Crash Bandicoot and a little bit of Lara Croft. This level has you work your way through the remains of a deserted ancient temple. The look and feel of this entire level always left me with so many questions when I was a kid. What kind of civilization is here? What happened to the people that made this temple? This level design is rich enough that these type of questions could exist for child me. I always liked the little faces and symbols on the walls. They always creeped me out and interested me just the right amount. Though they never distracted me from the fact that this level is really strong from a progression standpoint. You start at the bottom of the temple, then make your way through a 2D section with hidden boxes and secrets tucked away in 3D spaces. Most of the obstacles here are man-made, mostly traps trying to push you out of the temple or light you on fire. You really are successful in this level if you're patient, never force a jump, and wait to learn the pattern of the traps. The Lost City is an obvious skill check in the game. It's slightly longer than the levels prior and it holds the first colored gem. Further in, you work your way up a pretty classic 2D platforming section that feels extremely satisfying to get up in one go, then platform your way left and reach the exit. This upper section feels like such a big deal. You can feel the height that you're at with the backdrop having shifted to the top of trees and Cortext Castle way in the distance. It's memorable because you feel like you're getting somewhere. Not to mention this level variety is fresh. I mean, it kinda had to be. Like I said, with levels being forced to fit onto a tropical island, this game had to miss the classic platformer level tropes, so no snow, desert, mountain, or even something like space biomes to fall back on when making levels. I'm just trying to say that the devs were really creative with what they had to work with. Speaking of creativity, I haven't even talked about the classic Crash Bandicoot level. Come on, you know which one I'm talking about. The one that has you run right at the screen? Oh, the famous Boulder level. Starts off with a normally forward path that you're already accustomed to cut off, leaving nowhere to go but directly at the screen. You inch forward, curious of the unknown, and then the biggest boulder the screen can handle comes barreling at you. This level used to terrify me when I was little. My lifelong fear of being chased getting taken advantage of, the added degree of having to make jumps, avoid hazards, and break every box makes this level so incredible. I know, this is a direct homage to Indiana Jones. However, in the gaming sphere, I consider this type of chase gimmick a Crash Bandicoot staple. I kid you not, I don't care what game it is, if a game has me controlling the character running away from anything directly at the screen, I'm calling it a Crash Bandicoot tribute. The influence is there. I don't make the rules, argue with me in the comments. One more level that I could never get away with not talking about is Hog Wild. What an incredibly iconic level. Starts with Crash looking directly at the screen, scrunching up his eyebrows until he jumps on the hog. You only focus on dodging obstacles, timing jumps, and just barely breaking every last box. This level is pretty special. Not only is it the first Crash Bandicoot level that features some type of drivable vehicle, something that the franchise probably started getting a little too trigger happy with, but Hog Wild is mine and possibly a lot of people's first Force Runner experience. The concept of your forward momentum being all but taken away from you, leaving the player with just control of their X and Y axis as you ride through, it led to a pretty addicting level. I never was sure why I would always come back to Hog Wild just to play this section as a kid, but years later when I realized I had a temple run and Subway Surfers addiction, I realized I just found Force Runners very satisfying. If only they could have added a Hog Wild endless mini mode in this game, it would have had me hooked for hours. Well, at least we still have Crash on the run. Oh wait. If Crash wasn't anything, he's definitely a gaming pioneer when it comes to some of these levels, and I'm here to give him and the devs the respect they deserve. So Crash Bandicoot level settings were pretty good. There was a solid amount to choose from here. Jungles, temples, ruins, factories. There was a fair amount of variety. It wasn't perfect though. Most levels got repeated. Not the biggest deal, but this is still the first Crash Bandicoot game we're talking about here. Not all the polish that the sequels had was here yet, so if there was a level setting you weren't completely fond of twice, it probably was annoying. I'm sure no one batted an eye about going from jungle rollers to rolling stones, or the Great Gate to Native Fortress. But did we really need 2 lights out levels? 2 temple ruin levels? For the love of God. 2 bridge levels? Yeah, I bet everyone was thrilled to just barely make it through Road to Nowhere and 10 levels later see the High Road. Like I said, the Lost City is my favorite level in the game. I really do think it's a great section to go through. Now let's turn around and look at my least favorite level in this game. Sunset Vista. I simply just don't like this level for pretty much all the reasons I enjoy the Lost City. The Lost City setting was so interesting to me. I like the platforming challenges and learning the patterns on when to jump or run. However, by the time you're in Sunset Vista, I'm kinda just tired of it. You're just retreading the same challenges, the same jumps, the same enemies. Matter of fact, it's the longest level in the game, and you can really feel it if you ever played it. Most of the levels in this game have a fairly good pace. While I can't put a number on it exactly, if you went through each level deathless, you come out in a few minutes. Sunset Vista throws that notion away. Every challenge in Sunset Vista needs you to wait. Wait for this fire trap. Wait for the bats to pass. Wait for the wall pushers and rotating platforms. All repeated multiple times. Not to mention this level is home to 2 bonus rounds. So if you do both in one sweep, you can look forward to the loading screen into the bonus, the loading screen out of the bonus, another loading back into the bonus, and you get it. And I really don't like the level progression here. The Lost City was so cool how you discovered this deserted temple. You started in the bottom left, worked your way through some platforming challenges, then climbed up a 2D wall section, then worked your way back left out of the temple. Sunset Vista tries to do this again, I guess, but this time it's cranked to gear 5. Start in the bottom left, work your way through some platforming challenges to the right, climb up the 2D wall section. Work your way to the left for some more platforming, then climb up another wall. Traverse your way back to the right for even more time-based platforming, then climb up the last wall. Get me out of here. I normally just play through this entire game in one sitting, but if there's ever a time I do stop for a break on a playthrough, it's on Sunset Vista. And side note, not discussing the remakes today, but Sunset Vista is the only level in the Insane Trilogy that has a 5-minute time trial. Whoopee, imagine failing that close to the end. I understand it makes for a lot more sense to reuse level settings. I've watched every Crash Bandicoot history video and just about any developer video I could find, so I'm very aware of the challenges of just getting a single Crash Bandicoot level to work without the whole game completely falling apart. But in the end, most of the magic of exploring a new level is gone on repeat levels. Keyword here is most, because Crash Bandicoot levels are filled to the brim with my favorite collectibles in any game ever, the boxes. Boxes are impressive to me. Crash Bandicoot is the first platformer I've ever played, and since I've gone on to play a plethora of 2D and 3D platformers, I've just about gathered every collectible there is under the sun. Rings, stars, bottles, bolts, gems, orbs. Not one of them is as satisfying to collect as boxes in Crash Bandicoot. It's astonishing how well some low poly 1x1 boxes work for a video game. Each stage is filled with a set number of crates. There's a variety of different types that yield pretty much the same results. You have your basic boxes that hold Wampa Fruit, the iconic question mark box that holds Wampa or maybe an extra life, bounce crates, jump on them 10 times for more Wampa Fruit. Are we seeing a pattern here? These are pretty fun though when you find 2 at once. There's checkpoint boxes, extra life boxes, boxes that just bounce you higher, boxes that work as a switch to activate other boxes, and secrets and levels, and of course, TNT boxes. Now, the boxes themselves really aren't that impressive on the surface. Looking at them at face value, they almost seem like a brain-dead solution to break up the pace of going through a course. But the implementation of boxes was just so great. You see, Crash Bandicoot devs are smart people. Before boxes were ever included, a good amount of levels were already finished, or at least in a alpha state. They'd played as you expect. You essentially just run from point A to B like any other Reach the Goal style platformer with really nothing else to worry about in the level except for enemies. The problem? This is a 3D game. When comparing directly to a 2D platformer that Crash was inspired by, there's a lot more space left over, meaning you need something to fill that space up. The solution? Fill each level with boxes and incentivize the player to find and break them all in the course of every level. This not only gives the player something to do, but also gives the levels their own sense of pace. Each level has its own carefully structured box layout. As you go through levels, they'll be placed just about everywhere, in the main path, hidden off to the side, or floating somewhere off screen. They pretty much dictate exactly where every single player will go in the playthrough of the game. You're going down the path and then, oh, is that a mass boss off to the left? You're gonna grab it. You find a secret area? You better believe I'm back here checking for any hidden crates. Boxes can even be used as bridges and other tough platforming challenges. Do you know how much I used to sweat to complete some of these sections while also grabbing every box? The use and diversity of Crash Bandicoot's main collectible is something that I can't say I've ever seen again from any platformer till this day. They're just the perfect driving force that brings these levels together. They're simple and kinda dumb, and I just love them. How can you not want to break every last box? Not to mention breaking every box without dying will reward you with the elusive gem. Pretty much the only consistent reward in this game. Though I'll save the talk about gems for later in the video when we're discussing difficulty. Quite a subject for Crash Bandicoot 1. But it's these aspects, these simple pillars of the game are what set Crash apart from the crowd. The settings and level varieties, the way Crash could go from into the screen perspective one moment and then back to a familiar 2D platformer in the next couple of minutes. He'd be running right at the screen getting chased from a boulder, then the next moment riding a hog, then you're fighting a chaotic kangaroo in a straitjacket on a waterfall with TNT exploding everywhere, then traversing through ancient temples like it's nothing. It was a spectacle, really. You could try and make a case and say maybe it was Crash looking for an identity as a game. But like I said, everything worked in the setting parameters the game had. There was a sense of flow and it wasn't as disjointed as other platformers at the time. Crash was simply just different.
Cortex is a genius, a mental aberration. He's totally fixated on world domination. The local island creatures are dull and obtuse. Until the evil doctor turns on the juice, he wants them for his troops. They come out nincompoops, most especially Crash Bandicoot. Should have been a genius, but he doesn't quite compute. Crash Bandicoot. Anything can happen now that Crash is in pursuit. Tawna's been selected for running through the blender. Crash will fight to save her. He'll never surrender. He'll vanquish any villain to set his girlfriend free. He doesn't have a clue about how to proceed. His heart's in the right place. His brain's been rearranged unsuccessfully. Crash Bandicoot. If Cortex isn't beaten, he'll reign absolute. Crash Bandicoot. Play our game and tell your friends so we'll make lots of loot.
The 90s were full of video game tropes. You could say Crash Bandicoot himself was a trope. An anthropomorphic action character wasn't too unheard of at the time. I mean, just look at Taz the Tasmanian Devil, Sonic the Hedgehog, or freaking Bubsy. However, I still think Crash was able to find his footing in his own story. Sonic was a super cool hero that saved the day, stopping Eggman's schemes and rescuing animals. He did it all with incredible speed and style. His main antagonist, Dr. Eggman, was more on the wacky side, especially when it came to design. Round body, bright colored clothes, and exaggerated mustache. These two always gave the games this rad, cool 90s vibe. You could always feel it when playing. Flip that type of perspective to Crash and Cortex and you have a completely different feel. Crash was a failed experiment ripped from its home by Dr. Neo Cortex with the sole purpose of becoming the general of his animal army. It's a bit of a silly but fitting plan for Cortex. A man shunned by society, a lonely genius, not understood by the rest of the world. It made sense he wanted control over animals since humans never cared for his intellect and more out there views. Cortex makes a fantastic villain. He's a common mad scientist, but he's sinister. His design is perfect. The classic big head for a smart character with the iconic N tattooed on right in the middle. His bloodshot eyes, probably from working days on end in the lab. His many sharp edges in his hair and beard, all while sporting a lab coat. It was all typical for a mad scientist at the time, but it didn't change how he was perceived. Cortex was a villain you wanted to stop from the moment you watched that opening cutscene and you see him experimenting on an animal strapped against their will. It was pretty clear this was a bad guy. When Crash escapes and the focus is put onto Tawna, the player doesn't really need any more exposition than that. It's even taken further when Crash washes up on Insanity Island. There isn't any type of over-explanation in the story because it isn't needed. Crash gets up, brushes himself off, gives us a "you know what time it is" look, then literally spins into action. This moment is small but needed. Crash locking eyes with the player. It's the first time that connection is formed, and from then on out, the adventure has a clear goal: save Tawna and stop Cortex. It's pretty well known Crash games aren't big on story. Makes sense, platformers never really had their main focus on some elaborate tale. This is just a classic save the heroine and the world story, nothing Mario wasn't already doing at the time. While the story that the first Crash game put right in our face is nothing to write home about, the environmental journey the game lays out for you is pretty impressive, especially in subsequent playthroughs when I paid more attention to it. Crash Bandicoot is a linear game, not just in levels, but in level progression as well. We have a world map, meaning each level placed on that world map has to be positioned in an order that makes sense from an environmental standpoint, which led to a journey that was very well crafted and paced. The journey from Insanity Island to the top of Cortex's blimp is extremely memorable for this reason. Crash 2 and 3 went with warp rooms, and while I love the idea of being able to choose what levels you want to tackle first, I can't say it really does anything from a progression standpoint. Yes, I do enjoy having the little hub area to stand around in. It's a very nice touch. But what does it really accomplish? On the first playthrough, there's no real way you'll know what levels look like, especially in Crash 2. So most people either just pick levels at random or just go in numerical order. While the levels are still fun, it led to a more disjointed level variety. In Crash 2, you go from a jungle to snow biome, then all of a sudden you're jet boarding. All fun levels, it just made for fun pieces that eventually made a whole. While Crash 1 is this amalgamation of every level you go through realistically leading off into the next. The world map helps these sections feel connected. It's one journey all the way to the end, from the moment Crash washes up on Insanity Island. Crash first travels from the shores of the beach, till he climbs up, and before you know it, you're exploring the dense jungle. The natural progression from here is to continue through a jungle area, so we head directly into jungle rollers. Crash then stumbles into the Great Gate, a part of the island occupied by Papu and his villagers. Crash himself isn't trying to accomplish anything here, so we're just passing through. The villagers are just protective, which explains why they attack you. Past the fortress, we get levels like Boulders and Upstream. I like to think of these as some nice compliments to the island. Makes sense there'd be some old booby traps here in the form of a giant boulder, either set up long ago or by Papu. And Upstream is just a nice level to have for a tropical island. Crash then reaches Papu himself. I've always interpreted that Crash really just stumbled into his home, woke Papu up, and his first instinct was to attack Crash. You wake up and there's a weird fuzzy orange creature running around your house with shoes on, you're not going to be happy. I really like the placement of where Papu is. This is the only boss aside from Cortex direct assistant that's a human, and he's stationed furthest away from Cortex than any other bosses, kind of driving home Cortex's seclusion from other people. After Papu's knocked out, Crash continues on for some more island hijinks. Another trek through the jungle and rolling stones, you board a hog to speed things up, and then he escapes from the opposite side of the Great Gate and Native Fortress, so Crash can reach the closest next island. Everything here works. Island 1 is a very lush, dense tropical island inhabited by people and animals. The levels complement this aesthetic, all while still being ordered in a way that conveys Crash's journey so far. There's no weird placement of anything. Instead of how most games do progression, the boss of this island isn't saved for the end section. Instead, Papu actually lives here, so it makes sense you run into him in the middle of the island rather than the end. The game continues this type of amazing level placement throughout its entirety. While Island 1 felt alive and preserved, Island 2 feels ancient and deserted. It's here we get levels like the Lost City, Temple Ruins, and Road to Nowhere. It's a move away from the lush environment Island 1 displayed. These levels feel more like remnants of a past civilization. Most areas here make it pretty obvious that no one's lived here for a long time. Enemy variety has shifted as well. Island 1 was home to crabs, skunks, turtles, man-eating plants, and villagers, while Island 2 is filled with lizards, bats, snakes, and spiders. It's a lot more moodier. Speaking of enemies, Island 2 is home to two bosses, Ripperoo and Koala Kong. I love Ripperoo's placement here. You traverse through up the creek to simulate Crash working his way to the top of the waterfall where Ripperoo is. It's perfect. Very fitting too that he's on an empty island, away from any other type of real life. A good place for the most chaotic character in the franchise. His boss fight and laugh are pretty funny too. Koala Kong is placed at the end of the island in the mines. I don't particularly have too much to say about him. He's just down here working out. His little dance used to make me laugh, but that's about it. Sorry. Island 3 is Cortex's territory. The entire island is the base of his evil operation. I love how you can see the effects of his work with the polluted shores and dying plants in the overworld. This island has been ravaged by man. While the other 2 islands had levels involved with nature, Island 3 is full of factories, labs, and covered in toxic waste. This is Cortex's sickening abode. Thank goodness Crash is here to put a stop to this. Again, some superb level placement. You go from the bottom couple of factories. Heavy Machinery is a lower level factory right at the base of the island. Then Cortex Power, a power plant filled with minions, dangerous machines, and toxic waste to avoid. Generator Room is just beyond that, a deeper room of the power plant. It's dark and eerie. As you go through, there's Cortex watching you the entire time. This really used to terrify me. This section leads off into toxic waste. The island's pollution here is the heaviest you've seen. You work your way past minions and toxic ooze until you reach the heart of it all. Pinstripe, the CEO of the power plant and the lower level factories of the island. I love Pinstripe's design, inspired by a 2-bit mafia gangster with his suit and tie and Tommy gun. His office is the source of all the pollution on this island you've seen on your way. Pinstripe's fight has always been one of my favorites. I really like taking cover from his shots. I mean, yeah, you can kind of cheese them and get some extra hits in, but it's always been pretty fun to me. For the sake of Mother Nature and to reach Cortex, Crash has to put a stop to this guy. With Pinstripe gone, the real trek for Cortex can begin. Progression sees Crash traverse another bridge location that connects the lower and upper sections of the island together. Crash then takes a slippery climb, then he explores parts of the island Cortex doesn't use anymore and lights out and whatever temple is deep inside the island. Another factory higher up on the island in Castle Machinery, until Crash reaches Brio. This fight is personal. Brio was there for Crash's mutation. Definitely one of the satisfying bosses to take down. I love the placement of Brio's office. As Cortex's right-hand man, he's stationed high up on the island, but Cortex's ego would never allow someone on the same level as him, or even on level with his lab, so Brio is about halfway up. With Brio gone, the only place left is the lab. This level means a lot. While not the toughest level ever, the realization that Crash has clawed his way all the way back from Insanity Island to where everything started is pretty freaking cool. I always imagined Crash was here searching for Tawna. You fight through the different rooms of lab assistants and failed experiments. You can feel the dark aura here. It's very memorable. If I could have just added one thing, it's for the chair that Crash was experimented on in the intro to be somewhere in the background. Still, the tone of the lab makes for an incredible last level. Now with nowhere left to run, Cortex is pushed into a corner and forced to attempt an escape via his hot air balloon with Tawna. So the only thing left to do is for Crash to jump aboard and go toe-to-toe with Cortex himself. Talk about setting the stage. While the other boss fights in this game were pretty good when it came to setting, fighting Dr. Neo Cortex on his blimp, circling his island on fire for everything you've done to it is a complete spectacle. I could have not asked for a better stage to fight Cortex one-on-one. The fight itself is great. Cortex will fire regular shots at you while constantly laughing. Then he'll shoot some blue shots that have different patterns that tries to trip you up, before he just completely unloads an entire clip at you, as you wait for green shots that you can spin back at him, until he's down to one shot left and you time that perfect last spin. All while you're in this narrow, playable area. This may be the first game in the series, but this to me is the peak of boss battles in Crash games. Crash Bandicoot fights have always been simple, but very few have the stakes of this first Cortex fight. This payoff of being able to see what Crash did to the island as you went through levels makes for this awesome shot of Cortex Island in the background. I think it's cool you're finally on the blimp you've seen looming in the background the entire game in levels like the Lost City, Road to Nowhere, and Native Fortress. I mean, heck, you could even just barely see it in Insanity Island. It's amazing to be standing somewhere you could see when you first started the game. It's really astonishing how it all feels connected. I really do wish that later games in the series could have done something similar to capture this type of magic and build for a final fight with some adventure through the levels. Like I stated earlier, Crash 2 and 3 warp rooms are great, but you lose that adventure you get when you place the levels down in their own natural order, like Crash 1 did. I understand it allows for a better variety of levels in the overall game, so it's a hard argument to make. Some of my favorite levels in this series come from 2 and 3's more out there environments, and there's no way a progression story could have been made with Crash randomly exploring a tomb in Egypt, or one of the many random places he's been to, so I get it. Crash 4 kind of attempted this level structure with an overworld map, though none of the levels really felt connected. The story is based around you time hopping all over the place, so it might as well be Crash 3 again, in a way. All I'm saying is, in the end, Crash 1 really does feel like a journey, and it's probably the most rewarding game to finish in the series to this day, or at least to me it is.
Turn the pizza around! It's stuffed crust, you eat it backwards! Carry on!
In case you forgot, you're supposed to eat stuffed crust backwards. With a ring of cheese baked right into the crust, it's the most fun you can have with the pizza. Right now, a large one topping is only $9.99. Pizza Hut, the best pizzas under one roof.
Would you like to work here?
I'm not housebroken.
Now that I've spent a pretty good amount of time gassing up Crash's debut, it's time for me to knock it down, because this game has some pretty severe wounds. So I need to start with the elephant-sized Wampa fruit in the room, and the difficulty. Difficulty in Crash 1 has always been all over the place. It's hard for me to find the words when referring to it. Crash 1 is no doubt a hard game, but the difficulty has always come from inconsistent sources that kind of just add to a whole. Sometimes this game is simply just a challenging platformer. A lot of levels are just on the harder side. Sunset Vista, Slippery Climb, these are the type of levels that will trip you up. It isn't too uncommon that you'll die over and over again, but I can't really fault the game for something like that. You timed a jump wrong and sent Crash to his death, that's kind of on you. However, other times you're dying because the game's inability to combat things you normally take for granted, like depth perception. Just being able to judge where Crash will land can be pretty difficult. This is most apparent in levels that have you running forward and jumping to tighter platforms. Sometimes you jump and think you're going to land on the next platform, and then are surprised by Crash plummeting to the ground. For me personally, it's always been the temple levels. It's pretty routine that I'll misjudge a jump somewhere in one of these levels. But I don't hate the temple levels because of this depth perception problem. While it is an issue for me, it doesn't completely write off these 2 entire levels. It's just a minor annoyance. However, the depth perception problem in its worst form can outright ruin a level, and in Crash 1, depth perception has its most egregious showing in the bridge levels. No doubt the reason why these levels are so infamous. Road to Nowhere and the High Road have many problems, but none worse than just trying to judge where to land Crash. Even with the use of his little shadow, it leads to most people either overjudging where Crash will go or underestimating where he'll land. It's just a lot of jumps of faith. If you're the type of person that struggles with depth perception, you're basically in platforming hell. Add in a dog enemy that can't be damaged running back and forth, platforms that break away when you land on them, forcing you to go fast rather than take your time, a little bit of ice physics for good measure, and you have one of the most broken levels I've ever seen. Twice. No wonder people just started using the ropes. It's kind of laughable how hard these levels can be for some people, and the majority of that difficulty is depth perception. Which is kind of a shame, because this is the type of thing you'll be dealing with for the entire game. You kind of just have to get used to it, or you just have a really bad time. Later games in the series kind of combated this depth perception problem. It's extremely easier to tell where Crash will land in Crash 2 and 3, not to mention the platforming in those games is a lot less tight. The majority of Crash 1 levels are just areas with giant chasms underneath you. It's almost like everything you're standing on in Crash 1 is a tiny platform. While in the sequels, the levels are made up of a lot more solid ground with pits for you to jump over. It's pretty much the main reason why Crash 2 and 3 are night and day compared to Crash 1 when it comes to difficulty. So I'm glad this was fixed in the future. Something else that the sequels fixed was Crash's momentum problem. I don't even know if this is a big deal for anyone else, but it's something that really gets on my nerves. For the most part, when you're controlling Crash, he controls pretty much how you'd expect. His movements are pretty precise. There's no analog sticks, but the digital pad is serviceable. There's no delay on inputs or anything. He may be a tad floaty in the air, but for the most part, I'd say Crash feels good. The only instance in the game when I say Crash feels bad is whenever you're moving while spinning. The spin in Crash 1 has a bit of a forward momentum. It can actually speed you up a little bit too. You can actually try it on Boulder levels for like a little speed boost. But if you just touch the direction you want to go once and spin, Crash will kind of slide in that direction and he'll go further than you want him to. And you can go try this now so you don't think I'm completely crazy. Crash will just go in that direction like he's on ice. This seems small, and it kind of is. However, it gets increasingly more apparent when Crash is running, jumps in the air, and lands into a spin. If that happens and you don't touch a thing on that controller, Crash will just slide further than you were ever ready for. In reality, this is just a couple of inches, but a couple of inches in Crash 1 with platforms being as small as they are in this game is a death sentence. I know this sounds very situational, but it really isn't. Crash 1 is a game that has a bit of a flow when playing, kind of like Donkey Kong Country. It's very common to get into this zen mode going through levels. You're running, jumping, breaking boxes as you pass them, and defeating enemies. It's not too uncommon that you find a platform that has only an enemy or a single box on it. Your natural thought while playing is to jump and spin the box as you land. Seeing Crash slide right off the other side of that platform will most definitely ruin that flow. It's a frustrating feature, especially when you come back to this game because no other Crash game does this with its spin. It's just something you have to get used to in Crash 1. I actually have a rule to never spin while landing, and I normally just make sure I come to a complete stop before breaking boxes on a single platform. That's one of those things you have to just pay attention to. I wouldn't be surprised if people never noticed it and just chalked the game up to being old and feeling dated. It just kind of feels bad. Okay, I feel like I've been talking about things that make the game frustrating and not just hard, so let me try to fix that. Checkpoint boxes have a habit of being far and few between. While I don't need them every 10 feet, Crash 1 has some levels that just barely use them. Slippery Climb comes to mind. This level, in my opinion, is the hardest level in the game, and not because of frustrating features. I actually think it's an honest challenge. It has tricky timing, tight platforming, and very scary jumps. It used to terrify me as a kid with its atmosphere. I think it's very fitting that the reward here is the red gem. Any reason there's only one checkpoint box here? Seriously? Any reason at all? I understand we're on the third island late into the game, but this level is hard enough as it is. It makes no sense to make it all the way up this wall, almost reach the end, die somewhere, and get sent back halfway down the level because you messed up on one jump. That's enough to make players rage. It honestly feels like the developers just forgot to add an extra checkpoint box somewhere, and this is the result. This is probably the worst case of spaces between checkpoints in the game, and later games in the series remedy this problem by adding in more checkpoint boxes if you were doing bad. But it's just crazy to think that you can make it as far as the bonus round in Slippery Climb, die, then get sent back all the way past that point. Speaking of bonus rounds, oh boy, what a mess. The entire bonus round system screams 90s arcade. It's such a bizarre way to handle them. Levels that have bonus rounds have 3 tokens hidden in boxes all throughout. Simple, if you want to go to the bonus round, collect all 3 tokens and you're whisked away. Pretty weird, but not a huge problem. Different types of tokens can be a little more tricky to find, like the Brio or Cortext ones, but it's still not too bad. I don't like the idea that tokens can be spun away or blown up by TNT crates though. That seems a little ridiculous, but that's not really the problem I have with them. It's in the bonus rounds where my problem lies. Problem 1, you only get 1 chance at bonus rounds. Accidentally fail one and that's it. You're gonna have to exit, then re-enter the level, collect the 3 tokens, and try again. Kinda seems like a rough punishment, especially in Sunset Vista's Cortext bonus round for the key. That's a long trek through a level just to retry a bonus round. Problem 2. If you want a chance to save your progress in this game, other than receiving a gem or a key, your only choice is to finish a bonus round. Yes, that's right. The simple feature of saving your progress is something that is earned in this game. If you're not someone that feels that they can take on the task of getting gems, which is a whole nother conversation we're about to have, then your only means of saving in Crash 1 is to find the levels that have bonus rounds, collect the 3 Tawna tokens, then complete a bonus round so you can save. Why? What does this add? Was this just here to make the stakes feel higher? In a game that is as hard as Crash 1, it almost seems like a cruel joke that you can't just decide I need a break and turn the game off without the fear of losing progress. The function barely works properly anyway. In one of my playthroughs for this video, I needed to leave for a bit, but I couldn't until I finished Sunset Vista and got a chance to save. I went through the level, saved on the bonus round, and ended up getting the gem and the key anyways, which meant I got to save 3 times, then got off the game. When I got back on the game, I was still stuck on Sunset Vista. The gem and key I earned was saved, but I still needed to beat the level again to progress. What a mess of a system. Earning your save is such a choice for a video game. I don't even know if it adds to the game's difficulty or just makes the game a chore to stop playing. Although this was the last time the franchise would ever have this type of system, and for good reason, my god. It leaves this big stain on the game for me whenever I come back to play it. It just really shows the game's age, which is a real shame. Because of all the things in this game that I always consider Crash being ahead of its time for, earning your saves is a feature that really pulls it back. I hate that, because the devs went the extra step to make passwords as another option for saving. This is something I really like. Video games in the 90s and early 2000s was a pretty tough sell. You'd be hard pressed to find someone who had their own console, had games for it, and also had a memory card. Those things used to be expensive. So the devs going the extra step to have passwords for every possible save outcome is something I really appreciate. I still remember that first time I looked up the super 100% password on some random website. It blew my mind finally getting to see all the secret routes in the game that I wasn't skilled enough to unlock on my own. Then going to see what lies at the end of the Great Hall finally, because there's no way young me would ever be able to get every gem in this game. Passwords were a blessing, and I mean that. Alright, so it's about time I start talking about gems. As the main reward in Crash 1 and the most difficult collectible in the game to acquire, I think they're worth talking about. Unlike rewards in later games in the series like crystals, gems are harder to come by. I really wouldn't be surprised if a new player did an entire run of Crash 1 and never saw a gem. They're that hard to get for some people. Not only does the game not really point out their existence in obvious ways, gems are really skill based. To earn a gem, you need to break every box in the level without dying anywhere after the first checkpoint. Most levels give out clear gems, while select levels give out one of 6 colored gems. These are used to visit secret areas of levels for remaining boxes that weren't available on first visits. So it's not uncommon to get a colored gem, then head back to another level and use it to get that level's clear gem. So for instance, getting the green gem in the Lost City allows you to go back to Jungle Rollers and use it to get the 3 boxes that were hidden off screen and then get the clear gem for that level. The reason you want all clear gems is because they allow you to reach the end of the Great Hall and give you the 100% ending. Too bad most people will never get to see the 100% ending, because actually fulfilling that task is immensely difficult. Getting all 26 gems is simply a task that most people don't even want to bother with, and I can't blame them. Playing through a level, dying, then having to restart it over and over again is an exhausting routine, especially on longer levels. Do I mention Sunset Vista again? Having to restart the trek through Sunset Vista more than 2 times will most definitely have you turning off the game. It's grueling, especially in a game where almost every jump has you inches from death. In a game where your timing needs to be perfect all the time. In a game where boxes are hidden in secret places that can literally make 0 sense. Why the game devs expected you to somehow be flawless on every single level is beyond me. Not to mention just figuring out which levels give out which gems isn't outright told to you anywhere. On your first playthrough, some levels give you gems and some need those colored gems. So most of the time, you're playing through levels that have boxes hidden behind gem routes. Make it to the end of those levels without dying and you just get the great job but you miss boxes screen. Want to know which levels give you those special gems? Well, you gotta go through the levels first and find a corresponding fake colored gem. Oh, and speaking of missing boxes, it's not like the inside of levels let you know your current box count or how many boxes are in the level to begin with. Just gotta make sure you comb through the levels good enough that you didn't miss any off-screen boxes, so you don't get that classic meme of missing just one box. Crash 1 does hide boxes in some pretty tough ways, but it's nowhere near as severe as one of the games down the line, and you already know which one I'm talking about. In the end, getting gems in Crash 1 became something that a lot of fans did not enjoy. I'm glad in the future they toned down how harsh of a system it was. I know when I was young, gems were pretty rare for me. I could consistently get them on levels like in Sandy Beach and the Boulders. Still remember that first time I earned a green gem on the Lost City. I was in rare form that day, and I couldn't replicate it on later playthroughs. Much too hard for younger me. These days, getting every gem is pretty routine for me whenever I run through this game. For this video alone, I 100%ed this game 6 times. 2 times for footage, 2 more times to help with my writer's block, and 2 times because I like this game and it's fun for me. Not like I'm some ultra amazing player, but once you know the levels and Crash's little movement quirks, the game is really just muscle memory. I can really knock this game out in a little over 2 hours, even with its difficulty. I used to even want to learn the speed run for this game. That doesn't mean I still don't die. It's very easy to make a mistake in this game, even though I've played it so many times. And I think that's a testament to how difficult this game can be. Even with experience, it's no walk in the park. In some cases, I kind of like that it's challenging by nature. But overall, I really do not like the precedent that Crash 1's difficulty set, or the precedent that people think it's set. Over the years, there has been a rising number of people who are seriously under the impression that the Crash Bandicoot franchise as a whole is meant to be these ridiculously challenging games. Everyone on the internet is under this misinterpretation that the Crash Bandicoot games are these Dark Souls level platformers, and it's really never sat right with me. Crash Bandicoot 1 is a hard video game. There's no doubt about it. But the series would never see a mainline video game as hard as its debut until Crash 4. And I think Crash 4 itself is a result of game developers also believing this notion that a Crash game needs to be really hard or people don't resonate with it like how they did with the originals. And that's just not the case. Crash Bandicoot was never advertised as this crazy hard video game. It was just a 3D action platformer. Crash 1's difficulty wasn't the developers trying their hardest to make levels that would get you raging over and over again. Instead, this game is really just the result of a very young team in their first years figuring it out. Naughty Dog at the time Crash 1 was shipped was only 8 to 9 people. That's how many people ever touched this game. At the time, as far as Naughty Dog was concerned, there was no other game other than 2D platformers to base the first Crash game on. So with little inspiration to draw from, everything was new. And I mean everything. A new character, a new system to make, with tech they had to learn from scratch, and a new genre of game for them to work on. I mean, it's no secret that the game Naughty Dog worked on prior to Crash 1 was Way of the Warrior, a fighting game for the 3DO. You can't say with a straight face that would make for a smooth transition into a 3D action platformer on newer hardware of the PS1. It was always an uphill battle. Why do levels in Crash 1 feel so experimental? Because we have a team really just hacking away at it. Literally, Crash 1 levels were hand-drawn. Jason Rubin has gone on record calling the design philosophy of the first game no real design. That's why most levels, structure-wise, ended up feeling kind of random and out of place. For the most part, they were all kind of a mess, especially when you compare it to the sequels when these problems are ironed out. The bridge levels are a direct result of Jason Rubin's best attempt at making a level on his own, with no experience on level design or what a Crash level should even be. So out of it came one of the most hated levels in the franchise. Not like they could be picky about a few bad levels anyway. Getting a Crash level to a playable state was said to be something that took hours to process. If one random frame was wrong, the whole engine would crash, no pun intended, and they would have to make adjustments then run the whole process again. The fact that 32 playable levels along with bonus rounds shipped in the first place is nothing short of a miracle. It's these reasons years later why people look at the Crash franchise as the Dark Souls of platformers. Why YouTubers make videos of how hard it was to platinum the Insane Trilogy. I mean, to its credit, Crash 1 on the Insane Trilogy is still harder than the original Crash 2 and 3, but nowhere near the original. I just hate that this stigma stuck with the franchise because of these first game problems. There are legitimately people who I've seen online say they steer clear of Crash games because they think it's going to be this frustrating playthrough. And I wish that wasn't the case. It's a real shame how difficulty can affect the game. When it's all said and done, the original Crash 1 was a very innovative game. It was a very difficult game. A very rough game. And of course, a very fun game. If you ask me, this debut did everything it was supposed to do and maybe even more. It solidified a franchise. It locked down the foundation of what Crash Bandicoot should do and no doubt showed where the game had potential to grow. It accidentally made staples for the franchise going forward. There's a reason why pretty much every mainline game features some type of chase and vehicle type levels. Crash 1 ultimately proved to everyone and to itself that you can be an action platformer character that isn't Mario or Sonic, which is in no doubt a big deal. The 90s were ran by those two. No video game character could even come close to their level. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, this guy, this orange fuzzy big face rat, came and gave the PS1 a face, some type of identity. I can't imagine the worry that came with attempting a character like Crash Bandicoot must have felt. For all the initial success Crash 1 brought, it could have easily been that much of a disaster. Even today's platformers have trouble finding their own footing. Simply not being Mario in the 90s was enough to keep people away from your game, so Crash Bandicoot cementing his own avenue was big. Not just for Naughty Dog, but for others. The PS1 would go on to see many other 3D platformers, and I like to think that Crash played his part in inspiring other games. He proved other characters could shine, and I think that says a lot. Crash Bandicoot 1 is not a perfect game. It's scuffed to hell, and I wouldn't change a thing about it. Yeah, the game is crazy hard, but that's kind of part of the fun. Crash 1 demands perfection, and I'm the type of player that can step up to the plate for that challenge. This was just Crash's debut, but thanks to its success, he'd get a sequel in just a year. People eagerly waited for Crash to come back. Though Crash Bandicoot being Crash Bandicoot meant he couldn't just come back. He would have to strike back.
Bandicoot will be my general, and he will lead my Cortext commandos to world domination. This time I shall reign triumphant!